everyone. Welcome to Dialogue 1 of Season 4 of Literature Across Borders. I'm almost pinching myself. We have come quite far with this program, and it's just been such a delight. My name is Megha Gupta, and I'm the co founder of this wonderful program with Dr. Alexia Casali at Bath Spa University, where this program is situated. I've been working in Indian children's publishing in English for the past 15 years, and I've also written some books on environment and contemporary history for young readers. Lexi or Alexia is a reader in writing for young people at Bath Spa University and is also the author of some fabulous books of fiction for young readers as well as older ones. So, for those of you who don't really know about literature across borders, what we basically do is every year, Alexia and I, we sit down and we pick 4 themes. And on these themes, we pair books that have been originally published in the UK and in India. And then we make these books travel to students at universities and schools now in both of these countries, where they read these books and convene in dialogues such as this one, the very first dialogue for season 4. What we're trying to get out of this exercise is to understand how authors in different cultural contexts are writing about the same things. So today's dialogue is about a theme that has dominated, Indian writing in English internationally. I mean, think Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children or Gitanjali Shri and Daisy Rockwell's The Tomb of Sand, both of these books internationally recognized because of their Booker wins, both of them on the theme of partition. But what we don't often think about is how is children's fiction talking about this theme? And that's precisely why we have all convened today for this dialogue. Um, Before I begin, I would request all of the wonderful students. We have students from Bath Spa University in the UK and students from the University of Hyderabad in India talking to us today. If all of you could sort of briefly introduce yourself, maybe we could begin with Srijan and then sort of go to everyone else. Yes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Srijan or Srijan. I'm currently pursuing my master's in English literature at the University of Hyderabad. Um, I was really excited at the opportunity to participate in literature across borders because children's literature is something which I was really excited to explore especially when in my undergraduate days, because it was something so interesting to me that, we can actually engage with this in more critical ways than just sort of confining it to, like the readership of children. Like it's not just the fact that children are reading and engaging with these books, but they often represent something far more than that. So I was really excited, and especially the theme of partition is something which is very close to me. So I'm really excited to go forward with this, and yeah, to hear everybody and what they thought about the books we were discussing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Vaibhav?
Hi everyone, I'm Vaibhav. I too am pursuing my master's in University of Hyderabad. I'm really excited to be here. When all these things came around, I was reading about partition. I was getting to know all the complications and everything behind it, and just reading in narrative form. It's been really great getting to know about my country in a lot, like in a deeper way. Yeah, excited to be here.
Thank you. Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm in my second year of writing for young people, master's writing for young people at Bath Spa. But I'm from the USA and I live in France. So I'm doing the online degree. I was, very surprised by this subject because I didn't know about it. And I'm going to use the excuse that I'm from the USA, so we didn't really learn about this, but it's no excuse. And it was really eye-opening to learn about this, the partition and how it affected families.
Sure. Kahini? Thank you.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Kahini. I'm also pursuing a master's in English. I'm in my first year in University of Hyderabad, and yeah, very excited to be here. And as Srijan said, this topic is definitely personal for us, also like not just personal, culturally very close to us as well. very interested to hear what people from different cultural backgrounds have to say about it and fictional representations of it. Yeah, thank you.
Siobhan?
Hi everyone, I'm Siobhan. I am also a student at Bath Spa University, but I'm studying creative writing rather than creative writing for young people. So I am writing or in the process of writing my own novel as part of the program. But I was really interested to be part of this, despite the fact that I'm not a sort of children's literature focused student, partly because I actually spent a lot of my 30s living in India, mostly in Delhi, and my father-in-law's family were in fact displaced during partition from now Pakistan to New Delhi. So this has like a personal resonance for me, and I'm really excited to explore it further with everyone.
Thank you so much. Very interesting backgrounds, and actually, that sort of leads me straight into the first question, which is, when it comes to histories that have shaped nations this way, when we get into these books, especially I'd say this of readers in India, we assume, we already get in with a certain amount of knowledge. But as Laura sort of shared in her intro, that this was the first time you were learning about the partition of India. So if we could sort of briefly have all of you tell us about when you first sort of encountered this historical event, in your lives, and maybe we could start with the students in the University of Hyderabad. Was it a personal sort of experience that led you into this history for the first time, or was it something you studied in school for the first time? It'd be great to know that. So if we could start with maybe Kahini and then go to Srijan, then Laura, Siobhan, and then come to Vaibhav. Yes.
Yeah, I think me first getting to hear about it was at home from my parents and the way they would talk about their own parents. And in Bengali we have these sayings which like translate to, we come from across that barbed wire, across the barbed wires, and with nothing but a shirt on our back. These phrases are very prevalent in Bengali as well, in Bengali. So through those things, through those anecdotes, a lot of them are bloody because I was a child when I first got to know about them, about this issue. And then, yeah, in school history books would be the second area where I did get to know. Yeah.
Was it the same for you, Srijan?
Very similar actually. I again, my first introduction to partition was at home. Coming from Bengal, I feel like it is the same case for a lot of the people, especially people who moved to Bengal in the 1940s or prior to that, or maybe even later than that, because uh, a key difference when it comes to comparing the Bengal partition and the partition which happened in northern India or in Delhi, is that the borders remained porous for quite a long time. Even after 1947, the borders were quite porous till I think about 1971, when the Bangladesh Liberation War happened, which was on the basis of like language nationalism. For me, my grandmother used to tell me stories about her. There's this term called Desher Badi, which translates to ancestral home. She used to tell me about her childhood, her great grandparents, and how they had this beautiful home and garden. Now they had to all leave it all behind because of concerns of communal violence, job opportunities. Employment was a big concern as well when it came to the migration. And apart from that, again, the next generation after my grandparents, my father and his brothers, they used to have heated debates. At every family gathering, there were heated debates about what happened or what did not. So I was exposed very early on to very conservative views, as well as rather.
I think we seem to have lost Srijan briefly. Maybe we'll come to Laura and then come to Vaibhav before Srijan rejoins us. Laura, you said that you hadn't encountered the partition
Find out
before.
why.
Oh,
Hi,
sorry.
excuse. Was there an
Is that
internet disconnect?
Yes, we sort of lost you for a moment, Srijan. You want to complete
Okay.
this and then yeah.
Yeah, sure, sure.
No, do you want to finish what you were saying and then we come to Laura? Sorry,
Oh,
Laura.
I have no idea where I stopped actually.
Oh, you stopped where you were talking about the heated debates in your family
Ah, yes.
over.
Yeah, so my uncles and my father, like, again, the debates were quite heated. So very early on, I was exposed to both conservative views as well as very liberal views on religion, on gendered violence, on what happened in partition. And compared to that, when I came to school and I actually saw that the information was rather more general, it was more based on statistics and figures. The entire history which you get in your history books in school is centered around some central figures, but it was very contrasting to the specific knowledge or the specific experiences of my family, which I had sort of been exposed to prior to that. So I think that was a great point of introduction for me, where it triggered a curiosity that I think in big part looking back, I think that is responsible very much so to sort of launch my sort of endeavors into academia in the first place. But yeah, I think I'll just end it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura?
Okay, so as I said, I had no idea of it. And it's because also in the States, Gandhi is such a big figure of nonviolence that we're led to believe that India gained its independence with no violence whatsoever. Everything was calm, everything was perfect. And then I guess we just don't question it. We think, oh, India, what a great example, that we should try to be like that. But when I read the books, I was frantic. I asked three of my British friends, I said, did you learn about this in school? Do you know about this? The one from Scotland did not. She didn't learn about it. One of the ones from England didn't learn about it in school, but she has Indian friends, so they talk about it sometimes. And the third one did not learn about it in school. So these people were in school in the 80s and 90s. Um, but she teaches it to her students, so she's found out about it since. So it was a bit shocking what happened, and also that it's not taught in school in England. At least maybe it is now, but it wasn't at the time they were little kids. So yeah, I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know anything.
No, that's all right. It's all right. I think that's the beauty of something like this where we get to learn about each other. And I always think that history somehow binds us. It's literature that really sets us free because it gives us such a window into somebody else's lived experience. But on that, maybe we'll come to Webhav and then finally end with you, Siobhan. Webhav?
Yeah, so we grew up with the legacy of like partition, right? Yeah, like ever since I was young, even if I didn't exactly know what happened in this, like it was present. It was present in all those cricket matches, like those feelings used to come out, right? It was present in all the movies we saw, all the like patriotic movies. You saw that, and like yeah, growing up, we did have it in our like in the books and stuff. Like we studied the entire freedom movement, and it used to come at like and then India gained its freedom and was divided into two countries, and the underlying like all the communal tensions and all the violence, as Laura mentioned, like it sometimes it got sanitized. So like okay, like it was mentioned there were some riots in these cities and stuff, but we didn't exactly know to how such an extent, like how violent it really was. So now as I grow older and like we read, right, we read other stuff and we get to know more, we just I get to realize like how big of an imprint it has left in our like collective Indian consciousness. Like it has shaped our way of think, like shaped how we view certain things, how we view our like country. Yeah, that will be all.
Thank you. Siobhan, you said something very interesting. You said that, you married into an Indian family, and but was that your first sort of insight into partition?
Um, well, not quite, but it was my first sort of first-hand, I suppose, experience of hearing real stories from that time. I like exactly as Laura said, I went to school in the UK, I grew up here, and we didn't hear a peep about partition, colonialism, nothing. And I was in school during the 90s. I think Laura's right. It's being taught a little bit more now. But when I found out about it, I mean, I didn't find out really until I moved to India, which was about 12 years ago. And it was really the first time I'd heard anything about it. I don't think I even knew what, the word partition, which is extraordinary now, to think that we weren't being told anything about this event that our ancestors caused. So it was quite shocking to me, I think, when I first found out about it, and quite sort of almost disorientating, because you sort of imagine the history of your nation one way, and then you get to know that actually we did things that impacted other nations to the extent that we did. So yeah, but then eventually I married, as you said, I married into an Indian family, and then it just so happened that my father-in-law's family moved, and so I've heard the stories of his older brothers and his parents. So that of course changes your relationship with events, because it becomes personal. But yeah, so that's my experience, really. Yeah.
Yeah, what's actually really interesting that came out is, Kahini and Srijan were talking about the partition of Bengal. And what actually, a lot of people overlook is that in most of the fiction, in fact, all the three books that we have today, which is Nainika's Across the Line and Veera's The Night Diary and Swapna's Torn Apart, all of them deal with the partition of Punjab, which was it was just suddenly foisted upon the people, and it was very sudden and very bloody. And as Srijan sort of pointed out in when he was talking about the partition of Bengal was like slow, partition that lasted over several decades and was actually that way sort of elongated pain in some ways and quite bloody in its own way. There can be nothing not bloody about an event like that. But I that sort of brings me to the second question I had for all of you, which is fiction. How effective do you think is fiction as a lens into something that has impacted, the entire sort of the memory of a nation in such a profound way? It has impacted countless lives in countless ways. How effective is fiction as a lens into, a historical event like that? Maybe we can start with Laura and then come to Srijan, Kahini, Weber, when and I will pick the order. But yeah, Laura, can we start with you actually?
Yeah, sure. So I think fiction is very effective because the other way we learn about history, especially as small young people, is a history book, and we have events, and we have dates, and we memorize them, and then we have an exam, and then we forget them. Best case scenario, we might go on a field trip to a museum, we see some artifacts, we might be a little, we might say, oh, that's nice, that's great, that's how they lived. But in fiction, reading these fictions, focusing on one family or, a group of families, several people who are in the event, experiencing these hardships and some joys. There were some joys too. That speaks to us, even if we did not live in that era, even if we didn't ever experience those specific hardships, because they're human events. So, for example, in these books, we have love of a sibling, we have fear of losing a family, fear of losing one's home, the joy of sharing a meal, for example, those things, they allow us to identify with the characters. They allow us to share their emotions and thus see them as human. And I think that's really important today in today's world, to see others as human, and allow us to feel the pain that these historical events has caused to individuals and to families. So I think the emotion and the pain, I mean, there were some tears shed while I was reading these books, definitely. Definitely shed some tears. And there was a little bit of smiling, but it was a lot of tears, unfortunately.
It is one of those sort of events, isn't it? But I want to come to maybe Weber. What about you? How do you think of fiction as a lens into historical events? Do you sort of agree with what Laura has just said? And I'm very interested because Laura was coming into these books without any sort of background into the partition, and you sort of obviously coming in with some background. So I'd be very interested in.
I think fiction, like as a lens, is important because it allows us to actually live those historical events, right? So when we only read of them in books, in numbers, in statistics, we kind of we form something of it, and we don't really think of it as something that actually happened to people. Like now when I read 15 million people displaced, I can't comprehend that number, that amount of people moving from one place to another. And then you get to know how arbitrary the whole thing was, right? So what happens is, like in history, like it loses a lot of it. It has to put on a certain agenda or whatever. But what fiction does is it does brings us alternates, right? Alternative fix. It brings us alternates in form of different marginalized voices. And coming to in the book I picked up for this, The Night Diary. So it was very interesting seeing how a children reacts to all those events happening. Like as those since it was an epistolary novel, it had all those diary entries. So as you slowly see the date approaching of August 15th, and back of the mind we know it is about to happen, and we're just seeing and she does not know, she does not know the full scale of it. So yeah, fiction, I think it helps humanize a lot of these historical events. It helps bringing it to our conscious, and it also I feel like those forces which were unleashed during partition and everything, they are so very much still around us right now, right? And through fiction, when we actually see how those people interact and what causes these violence, it's it's not something, it's something very mundane, and it's something so, there's something weird about that balance. I can't find the word to put for it. And yeah, reading fictions and reading historical fictions, especially, they are important. They allow us in in having getting to know the thing better.
Sure, sure. Kahini?
Yeah, I think I would agree with what everybody's trying to get at here. The fact that when we see an event as huge and as disruptive as the partition, it is very easy to boil them down to the words that we use: countless lives, millions of lives lost, thousands of refugees. Whereas fictional representations kind of zoom in a little bit, make it personal, make the universal personal. And while those statistics are still there, they're very glaring, they're very real, we kind of see them through the characters that we follow. Like the novel I read, Across the Line, has plenty of characters, a plethora of characters, and we follow them throughout. And a lot of their experiences are relatable because the experiences were universal, but we also see it through the personal, which I think is the most typical feature of a fictional representation. Yeah,
Oh,
that
sure.
advantage we have.
Hmm. Siobhan?
Yeah, I likewise. I think it's a really effective lens through which to see these kinds of events, and having characters that we can feel close to, or we might even be in their point of view if it's first person. I think it really brings us very close to the events as they're happening, and that is a very effective way to understand a little bit about what that might have been like to go through. I think also it raises a really interesting question, which I think about a lot because I write historical fiction, which is about how important it is to stay true to certain facts when writing historical fiction. Obviously, we all want to have creative license when we're writing to a certain extent, but it felt really important when I was reading Across the Line that the facts were to be trusted, because ultimately you might be reading this and it might be the first time that you're like Laura, that you're getting to know about this event, and so it seems really important that the writer stays true to how things actually played out.
That's true. No. In fact, actually, I think Siobhan, you've given me something that I was actually thinking about when I read these books. And in fact, I want to come to you, Laura, before I go to Srijan, which is at any point of the reading exercise, did you feel that you needed to sort of tap into nonfiction and actually read something more of this historical event before going back into the novels?
I did. I looked it up to see, what had happened exactly and why. I still didn't really understand why that had to happen that way. The only character I recognized, and I think it's in Across the Line, it was Lord Mountbatten. He's the only person I knew. I didn't know about Radcliffe at all. I didn't know he had to draw this line, and he just did it and then they left. So I looked it up and I got the facts about it, but still the facts are not the feelings and the emotions and the deaths that were caused. The facts were just to sort of give me a base. And then, but both there are two books where you see trains coming in with bodies and blood, and it was just like, wow, that's crazy. That's crazy, amazingly horrible. It was awful. So I think yes, I probably will read like a history book on this to really understand it better and to understand where the English are coming from. Because also I'm from the US. It was a colony of Great Britain as well. So we had our independence, blah blah blah, in 1776, but we still like they were held up like, oh, Queen Elizabeth was so cool. Look at her. Look what she did. And we weren't against them, even though we were a colony too. So it was sort of this, let's be nice to these people. And when I read this, I was like, is that the same Lord Mountbatten who was killed in a bombing by the IRA? And I looked it up and it was him. And I was like, he's so famous. Why? Why was he so famous? How would I know about him and not know about the partition? And I think that he is a historical character who has done a lot of things. He was very powerful in a lot of ways. So I was at first I was just so confused and like frantically, asking my friends, what is this? And did you know about this? And how could I not know about this? And so I'm trying to sort of calm down and like learn about it and learn about it, and then these books, maybe I'll read an adult historical fiction about the same subject next.
Yeah, because it's a question that often, because I write nonfiction, and I've often asked myself this question, that would it be better to read the nonfiction before plunging into the fiction, or would it be better to sort of plunge into the fiction and the fiction creates room and interest for one to come to nonfiction? Because I've had so many, especially with younger readers, who'll come and tell me, but Auntie, why don't you write a story about this? And I'm like, I find it very hard to imagine stories on real life events. But then it often makes me wonder whether, it would have been better to start from nonfiction and plunge into fiction, or go the other way. And I think once, Srijan, if you have any thoughts on this, because I was going to come to you anyway, but if we can have maybe one other person share their thoughts on this, and then we proceed to the next question. Srijan?
Yeah, actually, this was one of the questions which was the toughest for me to actually think about, because I think I align with what Siobhan said, where fiction is definitely a very powerful tool to gain access to a historical event, but we must the author must have good faith for the reader to actually access the truth or the historical aspect of this matter, right? Otherwise, we are in a time where we see an ample amount of falsification happening, both in historical nonfiction as well as historical fiction. We see cinema, especially in India, where historical events are falsified to such an extent to suit political purposes. And the same goes for historical nonfiction as well. So over there, I feel like, is it on the reader to just consume objective analytical facts? I don't think so. But the writer must have good faith when writing about something which is historical. Otherwise, it can lead to a power grab of sorts, I guess, because it can really lead to a lot of chaos, because it really is a very powerful tool when the reader consumes it. But yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point, because when I was thinking about this, the other thing that, and then you sort of reminded me of it, is that even historical nonfiction can be very biased depending on where someone, because I've read this sort of same books of nonfiction by writers coming from very different perspectives, and you'd find very subtle sort of shifts in emphasis based on where they come from. And actually, Siobhan, you had sort of subtly touched upon this point. Maybe if you want to elaborate a little bit on that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to your earlier question, Megha, about whether you should start with nonfiction or start with fiction, I was just thinking about that because obviously when you write historical fiction, you have to read so much nonfiction research, right, before you get going. And or I mean, some writers I know do it more alongside the creative writing. Some do the nonfiction first and then start writing later. But I think it like has positive there are positive points to both, encountering something through nonfiction or encountering it through fiction first. I mean, I think when you're reading something like a work of fiction and exploring an historical event that way, as we've discussed, like you get to be very close to the action and you get to feel the feelings, or at least have that room for empathy that comes with reading a fictionalized account. But then when I was reading Across the Line, I knew that I was getting a lot from it because I already had a good baseline understanding of the historical facts, which I'd already gathered. So I think it could be positive either way. I'm not sure if there's like a black or white kind of answer for which is better. But definitely you can have maybe a depth of understanding of a fictionalized account if you have some knowledge in place already. It would be interesting actually for Laura to like reread perhaps like once you've read like a non-fiction book and then read it again and see if you got more from it.
Yeah, I really agree that somehow, it ends up feeding everything that we read sort of feeds into our imagination, and historical fiction is such a sort of rich source to get the engines of the imagination fired up about a particular historical event. Um, but also that line about, I think you said this, Siobhan, you said that, one has to go into it trusting the writer. And this is especially true of children's literature, because we sort of assume that an adult reader would sometimes come into books with some more knowledge than probably a younger reader. But have you sort of in your research, because you said you have read a fair bit of nonfiction, would you agree that, nonfiction itself can sort of have a difference in the approach to it, and it's not just facts at the end of the day. The writing does change subtly how someone talks about a particular event, even in nonfiction. So have you sort of encountered this in your research a little bit?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I ultimately, even if you're writing nonfiction, like you're still a person with your own biases and your own, approach, and your research will have been impacted by the restrictions, by what you can access. It's really interesting when you do research, and I'm actually writing about India as part of my manuscript. So I have been researching India, and you might read a book that's like been published 20 years earlier, and that has got a really different approach to someone that maybe published a book 2 years ago. Trends for history and approaches to history move on. It moves with the times, and the way that things are written about in nonfiction accounts will be really different today to how they were even just a few years ago, potentially. So I think that, history is, I mean, it's always changing, right? In the fact that we're always changing. So the lens through which we're seeing it is always changing. And yeah,
Is
it's
there an example? I mean, is there sort of, I'm sorry, if I'm pushing the point, but is
no,
there sort
no,
of,
not at all.
but is there an example that you want to maybe talk about?
I'm trying to think of like specific books that I've read where, I mean, for example, I read or I've read books that were published closer to the time that I'm writing in. So I'm writing in 1909, 1910. And, you know, there are lots at the time, like the British documented everything. You know, there are these gazetteers with like everything listed and all their sort of accounts of traveling from one place to the other. And the way things are written are obviously completely different, sometimes unacceptable in the language that they use or the way they describe people or places. And so, I mean, that's a big time difference. That's potentially 100 years difference. But even I think if you look at sort of earlier non-fiction books on India from, I'm trying to think of a good example without, I don't want to incriminate any authors, but
should I come back to you? Do you want to sort of
yeah,
think
sure.
about this, and then I can actually come back to you on this
Yeah,
if you want to.
absolutely.
But it'd be very interesting to get that insight, because what you say is very true. Even the way history is written, non-fiction history, also does change because people change, the people writing change, their ways of viewing the world change, evolve. But I'm going to actually get on to the third question. Kahini, I'll start with you if you don't mind, which is I've often felt that, you know, when we talk of history, we tend to sideline children's experiences of it. And fiction is one of the only places, at least I felt, where children's experiences can be put front and center of historical events. And I wonder whether you agree with that, and whether you sort of, you know, what you thought about the experiences of children covered in these books. Was there any child character that perhaps resonated with you in the book that you read?
Did you address me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Sorry.
Repeat the question a bit. My audio was really broken.
Oh, do you want me to repeat the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. No, what I was saying is that his sort of in history we tend to overlook children's experiences. We don't often put them front and center. Fiction is one of the few places where children's experiences of history are sort of put front and center, as they are in all three of these books. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that observation. You know, would you agree with that? And also, what did you think of the child characters in these novels and their experiences? Was there a character that particularly sort of resonated with you in the book that, you know, you read?
Yes, right. Yeah, in the book that I read particularly, which is Across the Line, there were three children that were centered in the novel. Three children whose like their voice had narrative agency. I think the first one who we encountered was Toshi, who is someone who experienced violence during the riots of partition, and she is the one who gets separated from her brother. So that is what we encounter in the first few chapters of the book, and then we move on to the
I think we've lost you, Kahini.
study.
Sorry, I think we lost you briefly. You were talking about
Okay, where did I
Toshi.
stop?
You stopped at
Yeah,
talking about Toshi, who encounters the violence
yeah,
in Across
yeah,
the
and
Line.
she is separated. Yeah, she is separated from her brother, who are both children. And we see that account of violence in the first part of the novel, in the first few chapters. And then the timeline shifts we skip one generation, and it's the grandchild through whose consciousness we encounter the rest of the novel, we read the rest of the novel. And then we have the brother's granddaughter, Toshi's brother's granddaughter, whose life we also get to see. So there are three children who are put in the center of the novel. And regarding feeling connected to anyone in particular, I think Inaya is a character who's the granddaughter of the brother, Tarlok. She's really funny and witty. I think I really like that. She's ambitious, and she's very quick to call out the other children in the story. That was really that spoke to me a lot. And then we also later in the novel, when I say the brothers and sister get separated, we follow the sister throughout the novel, and then later we have like a flashback form where we hear about the brother's experience after he disappeared and he got separated. So technically, there are four children's perspectives in the book. Yeah.
Sure. But actually, no, maybe I'll come to somebody else for that. What I wanted to sort of ask is, do you think that mm children's experiences of an event like partition are not often sort of spotlighted the way they have been in
Yeah.
fiction? Would you sort of like, I mean, before this, when you sort of even discuss at home or like read about it in school and elsewhere, would you agree that, that's a perspective that we don't often hear about historical events?
Yes, absolutely. Well, in school, as we I think already pointed out, it's not as personal, and therefore definitely will not prioritize children's voices. At home, also, yeah, the debates that we see are definitely among the adults. I would say, yeah, it is overlooked in representations that are not fiction. Yeah.
Uh, Srijan, was there, I mean, would you agree with that assessment? And was there a sort of child character in the book you read who sort of resonated with you?
Yeah, I think I do agree with Taine's assessment to a great degree. Although I did, my grandmother actually, I had the privilege of spending many hours with her in our veranda, and she used to tell me stories about her childhood because she was not that much older when the partition happened. And, I could feel like, I don't know whether she was changing her experience in order to tell it to a child or whether she was just reliving those moments. But the moments of joy that she communicated, the memories that she had in her ancestral home, they really were, something which I could really relate to at that moment. The joy of talking about mithai or which are sweets, or talking about the smell of flowers and going and playing with your friends. These things my grandmother sort of like told me, they really did sort of communicate to me as a child that experience, and I really did feel like I was missing out on something because in an urban like city home, like I didn't really get access to those open fields and those long play hours. But yes, I do feel like on the whole, when it comes to institutional education, we do completely neglect to a great extent, not completely, but neglect to a great extent the experiences of children, unless they are presented to us as a statistic, and that usually comes with very negative connotations. So, yeah, I do feel like fiction gives that a really good platform. Where I think that's one of the only platforms, as you said, that children's narratives can really take the center, and it can really touch human beings reading across all ages, because it is something which sort of really connects with us on a fundamental level, that a child is experiencing something of historical proportions, and how that child is internalizing these things and how they're dealing with it. In the novel that I read, which is Torn Apart by Swapna Hado, it was really beautifully portrayed because I saw two boys, Ibrahim and Amar. The whole story is told through alternating perspectives of theirs, and we see how they internalize this event. Ibrahim, someone from a rather privileged, class privileged background, who's a Muslim, who suddenly was thrown into this sort of very violent atmosphere because his family was actively being hunted down. And he gets separated from his family in the very first chapter. He sort of is left to fend for himself, at least initially. Right. And the place where the next time we see the next chapter actually switches to Amar's perspective, who is a boy who was orphaned from his birth, and he could never he was orphaned from his birth and abandoned on the steps of a temple, and he was there at his station looking at Ibrahim, ready to actually like kill if necessary Ibrahim, because he saw Ibrahim as this other, this villain, this enemy that he must sort of take care of. because again, the narratives that were going around, the propaganda, it really sort of made him believe that the death of everybody around him, including but not limited to his closest friend Gopi, was because of Muslims, was because of people like Ibrahim. And Ibrahim, coming from a privileged class, had those markers about him when he wore this clean kurta and he had this well kept hair. And all of these things enraged Amar to a great extent. But we still see that how these two boys alternating, like through their alternating perspectives, we get to see how they realize that they have much more in common than they thought. For example, Amar and Ibrahim both, perhaps at the same time, who knows, they both used to sneak into the legal cinema and watch Ashok Kumar's movies. And that was something which they both idolized. That was their sort of escape. That was their dream. It was their dreams. Ibrahim wanted to be a singer, while Amar used to watch his closest friend Gopi talk about his dreams of being an actor. So I really do think that, the way, uh, these two children have been portrayed in this book is very empathetic, and it's really, really moving for me personally. I think the character which resonated with me a lot was perhaps Ibrahim, because of the really rich and vivid descriptions that he sort of gives about his home and his memories with his Ammi and Abbu. Them sort of their whole charade that they do when it's his birthday, where they pretend that it's not, like they don't know that it's birthday, but then they sort of surprise him at the very end. And how he got pulled into that tradition later on when his younger sister Nafia came along. So I think, yeah, Ibrahim really has resonated with me on a very personal level because of my relationship with my sibling, although he's elder to me. But yeah, I really do appreciate in the book for the very sort of tender portrayal of both the characters. So yeah, thank you.
Laura, was there any character in these books that sort of spoke to you?
So definitely. I read all three books, so I'm just gonna go for the Night Diary and Nisha. So for me, the child's point of view brings a lot of emotion to the historical event, but also what I noticed is that Nisha, in that book, they question the behavior of adults, and they also voice the questions and emotions that adults can't or don't because they have other things to do, because they've been socialized not to get emotional, because they don't have time. So, for example, in Nisha's diary on page 127, I'm so angry with all the leaders. I'm even angry with Gandhiji for not being able to stop it. And then again on page 194, I feel so angry and I don't know why or exactly at who. I just want to be free. Wasn't independence from the British supposed to free us? So this last question, I think she voices it, but a lot of adults were probably thinking the same thing. But they couldn't really talk about it in front of their children because they would make them nervous and they, would scare them. But they were probably wondering, why does this have to happen? Why does it have to happen this way? It really. So whereas adults have to get on with their responsibilities, children can express these kinds of questions in a diary, like here, in conversation with other children, or with a trusted adult, like Nisha does with Kazi. And for me, we get closer to this core emotion that both children and adults are feeling and questioning through the child. That's what I took from that book.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Siobhan, was there a child character that spoke to you? And also if you had some thought on the nonfiction books.
Yeah, on the nonfiction, I was just thinking about, I think it was touched on earlier. We were talking about, I think maybe Sridhan mentioned it in the context of the partition of Bengal in 1971. And actually, I think, at least my encounter with partition, especially sort of nonfiction works about partition, is always about the partition of Punjab. And when you say partition, I think immediately that's often what comes to mind, at least for me. And maybe that's because I spend a lot of my time in New Delhi, so that might make sense. But what's interesting is, I don't know if anyone else has come across this book by Samuel Dalrymple, William Dalrymple's son, which was just published, I think within the last 6-7 months. Srijan, have you read it or you've seen it?
Shattered Land.
I'm so sorry. Yeah,
Shattered.
I've not read it yet, but I have sort of bought a copy of it. It's waiting for me back at home. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's called Shattered Lands, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it
yeah,
basically covers all the other partitions that happened. It wasn't just Punjab. And I thought that to the point, Megha, sorry, about you know, how history evolves, and how our understanding of historical events shifts with time. I think his telling and his account of those historical events was really enlightening for me. Again, it was like another layer of understanding uncovered, because I really had been thinking mostly about Punjab in the context of that. So I thought that was a good example of how our approach and our understanding evolves as we do, and as we deepen our knowledge. In terms of characters, yeah, I loved the children in Across the Line. I thought both of them were just such. It was just so lovely to see them, especially with their families, and the sort of intergenerational relationships. I thought was so great. I thought especially with the grandparents, they were so sweet, those relationships. And for me, it felt personal because I was also very close to my own grandparents, so I could really actually identify. It kind of took me back to sort of feeling really close to my granny and my grandpa. So yeah, I thought also what Laura said about the fact that children kind of ask questions, which as adults we're sort of trained not to ask, or things we don't question anymore. Maybe we're a bit jaded, or who knows. But I thought seeing it through children's eyes was just a really wonderful way to experience the narratives.
Thank you. Vaibhav, can we hear from you?
I'm sorry. Can you just repeat?
You want me to repeat the question? Yeah, I was asking, were there any child characters in the book that you read? I think you read The Night Diary, wasn't it? So
Ah,
Laura has already given us some insight about a character she really liked from that book. But what about you? Was there a character from that book that spoke to you?
yeah, yeah. I would like So I read the book Night Diary, right? So it's written in a form of letters. So the protagonist Nisha, she
Diary, yeah.
writes letters to her mother who has passed away. With she had an absent mother, and the book is in form of diary entries, which are also letters to her mother. So talking about her daily life and the entire thing that's happening.
Mm,
That's very interesting to read because like in epistolary form, right? As I had mentioned before, this you get this sense of approaching danger. It situates you on the now, on the day it's happening. So you feel a sense of time, so you can feel that happening. And especially the character Nisa, is interesting. Is interesting in one other way that she can't express herself. So she can't express herself to her father, or anyone. She can't talk to them, and she's very you would call it very she's not very an extroverted. So when the cook Kazi gives her diary, it allows her to express all those things there. Uh, so we see even and at one point her father is a bit annoyed with the diary. She's just they are on the move. They are moving to India, and she's continuously scribbling in her diary. So for Nisha, the diary becomes the only way to uh, like you know understand her experiences, right? So what's happening, because especially with since it's a child who is experiencing all these events, and she does not know what's happening. She does not know all the intricacies or all the politics behind it. So there are lines mentioned there, like, she does not know what Gandhi or Jinnah or whoever Mountbatten, what they mean or what they are up to, what is this plan to divide the country. So they don't know that, and all that confusion and all that chaos. The only way for her to situate herself is by writing in a diary. And the other and one other thing I loved about Nisha was before writing in a diary, she is also a huge, like, she loves to cook. So, and cooking for her represents a lot of things. Like, cooking for her represents a sort of connection to her grandmother, to the cook, and Kazi, who is a Muslim. So, like, there is a divide present inside the very house. But, like, cooking allows her to, like, bridge the gap between that. And even the book has a recipe printed out at the end. So, like, the author really wants us to focus on that. I'm sorry, I lost it a bit. I lost the plot a bit. But yeah, I love Nissan. And one of the central things in the book is, like, her relationship with her brother, her younger brother. So, her younger brother is, like, is the opposite of her. Like, so when Nisa is quiet, he's very, like, active. He's always, he's chaotic. And while Nisa is the voice of reason, or, like, sees the contain, he isn't that. So, we get to see their, like, sibling bond being developed. So, like, as they are on the move, as a very real danger is present, we get to see, like, them coming, showing up for each other and all that. And yeah, there was one more interaction, children interaction, which
No,
comes
but
to
actually,
mind.
my question, sorry, Weber. I
No, no,
was
please.
wanting to ask you, what I was wanting to ask is, um, I think we can get on to the next question, but what I was actually looking for is which of these characters did you most? Was it Nisha, or was it her brother Amil, or was it the dad maybe? I don't know. Was there a character that spoke to you? I mean, you sort
Yeah,
of
okay. There
spoke.
is one character I did want to mention. It's Nisa's maternal uncle, what we call Mama.
Okay, the
Okay,
one whose
so
house is.
Nisa does not have a mother with her, right? So, like, her mother is always framed as this absence. So we never get to know her, and, like, we don't see to here's only bits and fragments of her. So, like, there is pictures of one, like, there are pictures of her. So Nisa has grown all these years without her mother, like, without any connection to her mother. And when partition is announced, and they, like, they leave their house, they leave Mirpur Khas, so they stay at her what do you call, mama's house, and there we see, like, that bond that starts to form between Nisa and her mama. So Nisa's like
So was
uh,
that the character that spoke to you? Did you sort of like the character of the uncle?
yeah, I love the interactions that happen between them.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Yes. So because
Ye-
when you have so many characters in any story, sometimes I tend to finish a book and I wonder, okay, which of these characters has really stayed with me? Because all of their stories matter, but you end up dwelling a bit more about, I don't know, it always happens with me. But actually, all of you also sort of touched upon something which is what I really enjoyed about reading all of these three books together is they approach the theme in very sort of different ways. Uh, the Night Diary is epistolary. Across the Line uses this sort of shifting timeline format, and Bonaparte has alternating sort of first person narratives. And maybe, because Siobhan and Laura, you have both sort of read all the three books, I was wondering if you could dwell a bit upon which of these three sort of devices you felt is quite an effective one when it comes to storytelling. Maybe Siobhan, and then we can get to Laura, and then I can come to the others. Yeah.
I'm afraid I actually didn't read all three of them, but I did read Across the Line and The Night Diary. So they're obviously quite different in the way that the writers approach them. I think for me, I mean, I really loved both actually. I always love a dual timeline story, and I think placing a contemporary or relatively contemporary narrative in in a book really helps, at least for me, to be able to connect with the story in a sort of present day way. So with Across the Line, it being set between 1947 and then I think it was 2008, wasn't it, with the Mumbai terrorist attack, connecting also those two events, I thought it was a really effective way of kind of orienting a reader so that even though you're taking them back in time, there's still a more modern, graspable kind of reality that you can cling on to as well to help maybe ground you or help just sort of be placed in the story in an easier way, I suppose. So I really enjoyed that aspect of Across the Line. I think the only thing that I didn't struggle with it, but I did feel that perhaps there were a lot of characters and there was some jumping backwards and forwards, and I wondered how that would be for someone who, especially as the author uses, the familial terms like Bari Mama or whatever, all the different name, Mama Ji it might be or whatever. So and if you're not in a Indian family, you may not be very aware of those terms. So using two names for each character and then jumping backwards and forwards might be a bit challenging. So I think that was the only thing that I wondered about when I was reading Across the Line. But I loved the diary entries, the sort of letters to the mother, and I thought that was a really ingenious and sort of quite unusual actually, because you don't see that very often. So that meant that really stayed with me, that story.
Sure. Laura, what did you think
So,
of the
yeah. For me, definitely the shifting timeline of Across the Line. I love that kind of going, the intensity of, seeing what happened in 1947, then coming to 2008 and realizing that Toshi is Jai's grandmother. When you realize the moment you realize that, you're like, oh, this poor woman who's been living with this regret and this guilt her whole life. I feel like the shifting timeline allows more immediacy than, say, like a memory or a flashback. And it also adds complexity to this narrative as we experience the two families first as separate, and then until the final reveal, which was very emotional for me with Tashi looking at the painting with the six circles, and then the seventh one is the other pebble that he had kept, finding out that Enea's grandfather is Tarlok. That was so emotional. I'm sure I cried at that. Certainly, I was like, oh no, this is great. But without that initial separation of the two, the violence and the how it happened, their separation, I think the reunion would not bring the intensity of emotion that it did. So I think it's great having. I love the shifting timeline. I love just moving around. Sharon did say, yeah, I had noticed also that it was a bit complex. So I was thinking when I read it, this is for older. This is for a 16-year-olds, maybe 16, 17, maybe 15 to 17, because it is pretty complex and they do move around a lot. And with all the names, I had to write them down myself at first to remember who was who. But now, Toshi and Tarlok, I know them like really well, after having thought about it for so long. And yeah, just I fell in love with that pair of siblings.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Srijan and Kahini and Vaibhav because you sort of read the three books separately. What did you sort of, if very briefly you could touch upon, what you thought of the format of the book, because they all three of them are very different, but a little briefly because then we'll get into the reading of our favorite bits from the book, and we don't want to hold back on that. So yes, Srijan.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I think I really liked the alternating perspectives because it sort of alternates between two first-person narrators, right? So and they're in constant interaction with each other as well, ever since they come into contact. So so what ends up happening is that we get sort of the uncensored version of what they actually end up saying to the other person, and we also get the sort of response, both verbal as well as internal, for the other person as well. So I really liked that aspect of it, especially in Tonapart, when it tackles something as sensitive as friendships, especially in a communal setting. uh, Although epistolary is a form which is very close to me, it has given me some of my favorite fiction ever. I definitely enjoyed the most personally, like the alternating perspectives. I think those were very, very nice.
Kahini, I know both Siobhan and Laura spoke about Across the Line, which you read, but did you sort of agree with that
Yeah.
assessment that interesting, but also
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
slightly confounding
yeah.
with the characters?
I personally really enjoy non-linear narratives. I think the work that you need to put in to connect things together, I personally feel it adds to the fun of it all. I understand how the terminologies would be confusing to people who are not familiar with them. Even if they are familiar, there are so many characters. I understand why you would write that down, Laura. It is, yeah. But other than that, I think I saw it more as a form mimics content thingy, because when it the shifting narratives connects together the lives in a way that it replicates how intertwined individual lives are throughout history, and how across place and time people and experiences are connected. So the timeline not only shifts temporarily, but like we see events from 1947, there's 1966, I think, then 2008, 2006, but also pre-partition India, post-partition Pakistan and India, that is made possible through this narrative choice. And not only does the shifting narrative connect people together, connect the lives of people together, I really would like to bring attention to this. In There's this one chapter in the beginning where Arjuman is leaving, has to leave uh, India during the riots, and she leaves behind some souvenirs in Musafir Khana. That's the place that she lives. And years later, Jay and Toshi finds that piece of jewelry and a diary along with it. And then again, when the reunion happens with Habib, he realized that that jewelry and the diary belonged to his adoptive parents. So that connection that was made through the timeline kind of brings attention to also non-human memory that has been stored in objects and things and spaces that have been left behind. And that is made possible through this interlocking, interweaving timeline. So that is something I really like.
Thank you. Weber, very briefly, what did you think of the diary as a form of telling a story?
The Night Diary is the epistolary novel, right? So it's written in form of diary entries, and like how the diary is introduced is, as I said, like Kazi gives her diary as a as a pre-birthday present, and this triggered a memory in me because I remember receiving my first diary as a kid, and the entire like when you were a kid and when you have a diary, like you fill it with all things, right? You write about your day, you find interesting stuff, you store it there. So I remember feeling like everything I used to hear as stuff in that diary. Now, what it does here narratively is, especially for Nisha, since she is writing to her mother, she is not trying to present or document like an objective reality, or she's not constantly trying to do that. What she's doing here is she just making sense of what happened, trying to make sense. She's just presenting everything as it happens. Even if she does not understand it, she will still put it forward. So so this allows, so the text is very, there is sort of uncertainty in the text of what's happening. Everything happens in rumors. So when we hear partition, when we think of it as a thing that happened. A thing that happened was but here partition is it's never on the face. You'll hear about it. You'll hear about it being built. So you'll hear about, like, some fights that happen, or in a distant village, some communal sensitive things happen. So so Nisha's diary, Nisha's diary, like the diary form allows it to be, like narratively, it allows it to be a lot more immediacy. It allows immediacy, I would say. It allows for it allows for a set of expectations which the reader will keep, which won't expect any objectivity in it. So, like, if I'm going to read a diary, I will expect that, like, it will be a personal testimony, right? And that allows you to get closer to the protagonist, that, like, allows you to go closer to Nisha. Also, yeah, and lastly, like, the epistolary form it never attempts to map the entire history of it, right? It does not try to map the sheer scale of it. And I just really love that. I just really love that, like, in a small microcosm, microcosm existing there, but it's still the politics are still affecting it. So that was really interesting.
Sure, sure. So, we're in the last couple of minutes, the last 15 minutes of our dialogue, and I think it's a good time to sort of read some of our favorite bits from the books that you all read. If you could keep the reading short and tell us a little bit about why you chose this particular piece of writing from the book that you chose. Maybe Srijan, can we start with you, and then we'll come to Kahini, then we'll go to Siobhan, Laura, and then we'll end with Vaibhav. So, very briefly, a favorite bit and why it spoke to you. Yeah. So, Srijan, you're on mute. Sorry, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Yeah. Surely. The My favorite bit of the book, very hard to choose, by the way, because I had quite a lot of favorite bits, as you can see. But I, after a lot of consideration, I picked this part because it's especially important in the narrative of the book. Because this is towards the end where Amar, the Hindu boy, is actually coming around, and through all the hardships and the sort of troubles that he has been through with Ibrahim, as well as the certain intimate moments that they shared, where they realized that they were far more like they had far more in common than they thought. Uh, Ibrahim, like Amar has started seeing Ibrahim really as his own. So there's this portion where they have somehow found themselves in the middle of a sort of very feverish crowd, which has come to hear Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru speak. And right after that, they hear a rumor that Gandhi might actually come and speak as well. So there's a portion right after that where it's sort of Amar's internal workings, while the possibility of what seeing Gandhi comes is sort of a reality he's considering. So, but as I looked around at the sea of people below me, I started to have a sinking feeling in my stomach. I've heard of Gandhi, Ibrahim shouted to me excitedly over the noise of the crowd. Abbu told me he has been protesting for India's freedom for years. Do you really think he'll come? As the Prime Minister left the stage, chants of Nehru ki Jai started up again. This was the India I wanted. This was the India where Gopi would still be alive and we would still be sneaking into the Regal to watch films. But this wasn't the India we lived in. I looked down at Ibrahim, who was beaming up at me. The Prime Minister's talk had been just that, talk. India had been burning down for a long while before the partition, and what had Prime Minister Nehru done then? Now he was pleading with people who had no qualms about picking up something sharp and slashing their previous good neighbor's neck with it. The violence was only getting worse. There were no solutions. There never were. I'd learned that early on. The night would come and the mobs would be out. Ibrahim grinned at me, inspired by the Prime Minister's words, ready to take on the world and find his family. I had to get him out of Delhi. I had lost one brother already. I did not want to lose another. So the reason I sort of picked this passage out, because it really does sort of contrast, right? Amar, someone who reads since he was a child, hardened by the streets of India, really, and been through like very unutterable hardships. And he knows he's more pragmatic that way. He has sort of had to be pragmatic in order to survive on the streets of India. And he knows that there's very little that can actually reach the people of India. Even the Prime Minister can stand over there and preach certain like hopeful ideals. The people of India were already in the throes of violence, and they were too obsessed with sort of getting back at the other. Amar himself knew that, because Amar himself, at the very beginning of the book, had a sharp object ready in his slingshot, ready to launch it at Ibrahim. So I think at this point, like so late in the novel, where Ibrahim calls, no, where Amar calls Ibrahim his brother for the first time, he says that I had already lost one brother. I could not afford to lose another. That I think is so moving, and I was literally brought to tears because it was so. It just felt right, that, like. But yeah, yeah, that was my favorite portion from the book.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
it's a lovely bit, Srijan, really, very lovely bit. Kahini?
Yeah. I have chosen a passage which is a conversation between Humaira and Adila, her sister. So Adila is not that important of a character in this book, but I really like whatever she had to say. I would also like to mention that the climactic paragraph where Toshi realizes that the painting is about her, that would also come next in my favorite passages in the book, but I am choosing this one. Um, I'll read here. We have better roses in Rawalpindi, scoffed Humaira. Oh, of course, said Adila. How can anything here be better than Rawalpindi? You're basically a gadar, a turncoat, retorted her sister. Nothing in the country of your birth is good enough for you anymore, is it? Well, I'm not defined by where I was born, said Adila pointedly. I am happy anywhere on this beautiful planet of ours. All these newfangled ideas of yours will get you nowhere, Adila, said Humaira. This vegan thing and doing yoga and belonging to the planet, all this will only leave you without any true identity. Oof, just listen to yourself, Humaira. Are you making any sense? Tell me, does your identity begin and end with belonging to the country that you happen to be born in? Demanded Adila. To me, that seems like such a limited way of experiencing the world. So this paragraph kind of, to me, what I saw the novel as was the novel dealt with the question of identity a lot, and identity connected to your nation and to the place where you come from, and how through like as we progress in the novel, identity like blurred, the lines that are drawn that seem so rigid in the minds of people kind of get blurred through the character of Habib, especially because after he is separated from his family, he changes his religion, he physically changes, he adopts, and he's adopted by a Muslim family. So his identity gets it's so hybrid. And there is also this part in the later part of the there's a line in the later part of the book where Toshi's son, uh, Art Habib, when they come and book the hotel in Mumbai when they're coming to visit, uh, Toshi's son, in the typical Indian notions of Indian hospitality, says, "Why did you book it? I could have booked it for you. I would have booked a nice hotel for you." And then he goes to say, "We would have booked it for you because you are a guest in our country." But then he stops himself because is he a guest really? He did leave. He did migrate from here. He was a refugee from here. So those lines, when they get blurred, and what identity becomes after the blurring of lines, I think it's encapsulated by what Ardila says. To her, it's such a limited way of experiencing the world, of placing your belonging in certain areas or certain rituals, certain ideas. Yeah. Yes. Mhm.
Thank you. Very, very nicely chosen. Uh, Laura?
Okay, so I chose a passage from Across the Line, um, and I wanted something with a lighter quality, with a lighter feel. So I took the part where Jai and Inaya meet on the train from Heathrow to Paddington, and it sets up their rivalry for the rest of the book. So it's just very short. He's talking to his grandmother. So, okay, where will we eat lunch? She mentioned some place. It's very close to the station. Just then, a girl sitting behind Jai started to drum her foot against the seat rather annoyingly. Jai wished he had it in him to turn around and ask her to stop, But that would mean confrontation, and that was the last thing Jai wanted in this very quiet train with everyone listening. He glanced back to see if he could discreetly catch her eye and politely request her to refrain from kicking his seat. As he did so, she caught him looking at her. "Do you have a problem?" she asked sharply. Jai's ears turned red, and he quickly turned away without mentioning to her that, yes, he did have a problem. That of her kicking his seat, and then behaving like he was the problem. "What a pesky girl," he thought to himself. "What a weird specimen," thought Inea to herself. So I thought it was humorous. I love these little humorous bits because the book is, there's some sad moments as well. So I wanted to take something that would, that would lift up my my spirit. So this is their rivalry is very funny.
Yeah, that's true. Siobhan?
Yeah, so I chose a section from Across the Line where we are back in 1947. So it's over halfway through the book, and we're actually suddenly following Tarlok, who has been left by Toshi. So it's 17th of August, 1947. While Tarlok waited for Toshi to return with her doll to referee their game of Pitu, he picked up the green pebble from the ground, expertly tossing it in the air and catching it. In the distance, he could hear the chants, Allahu Akbar. The sound seemed to be drawing closer. From the other end of the road, Tarlok could see his father returning home. Relieved, he started to call out to him, but before he could say a word, someone swooped him up and started running. Tarlok tried to scream, but a large hand covered his mouth and most of his face. "Shh, be quiet," the man hissed. With his one partly uncovered eye, Tarlok could just about make out the man who was bearing him away was wearing the lace skull cap worn by Muslims. The man looked around furtively and dived into a small alleyway. He went through a maze of narrow alleys before finally slowing down. The man peered through the window of one of the houses where an elderly woman knelt on a prayer mat offering namaz. Pushing the door open, he gently lowered Tarlok to the floor. Tarlok was all set to scream for help, but then, much to his shock, realized that he recognized the man. It was Abra Chachu, his father's childhood friend. Abra bent down to Tarlok. "Go inside, Beta," he said. "Ramat Appa will take care of you, and I'll bring the rest of your family here as well. You just wait with her quietly, all right? And here, keep this with you." He drew off his skull cap and handed it to Tarlok, who hesitantly took it. Abra gave him a quick hug and left. 5 minutes later, Ramat Bibi finished her namaz and looked up to find a frightened little boy standing by the door. Tarlok flinched as she hobbled towards him. "You're Baldev's little boy, aren't you, Beta?" she asked gently. "How did you get here? Is Baldev outside?" Before Tarlok could respond, there came a loud banging on the door. Ramat Bibi went over to the window, drew back the curtain, and peeped out. It was a crowd of angry insurgents. She looked around in panic and noticed Abra's skull cap in Tarlok's hand. "Put the cap on, Beta, and sit there on the prayer mat," she said. So I chose that section just because I thought it was such a beautiful representation of how it was not between one person and another. It was a constructed separation. And, my own father-in-law's family have stories, that their family actually a Hindu family, but they were also sheltered by their neighbors who were Muslim. And I just thought it was such a moving moment, and it just showed the humanity, beyond these inhumane events that were happening. So yeah, I thought it was just a very poignant scene in the story.
Thank you. And Vaibhav, to sort of come to you in the end, could you read us your favorite bit from the Night Diary?
Yeah, so some of my favorite bits from the book where Nisha was directly, addressing her mother, right? And she was just asking about her absence, or like, asking about how I am the way I am. And so I'll just read one of those paragraphs, which, like, I love this paragraph. "Nobody ever mentions the fact that you were Muslim, Mama. It's like everyone forgot. But I don't want to forget. The truest truth is that I don't know any other children whose parents are different religions. It must be a strange thing that nobody wants to talk about. I guess we are Hindu because Papa and Dadi are. But you're still a part of me, Mama. Where does that part go? So, I just like to imagine it from her perspective, right? So, the country is being divided, divided on the lines of religion. Being a Hindu and a Muslim country, and she is both, right? But her mother, who was Muslim, she has been absent from her life. She does not have any connections from her mother's side, or other families or nothing. So once she does know that she is Muslim and the country is being divided, so her identity comes into question here. That's which side should she go? Which side am I a part of? Because uh, if the logic is to be followed, then my mother would be in this country and my father here. And they are to be separated. If they are to be separated, how am I supposed to be? So all these lines. So this struggle for her identity, especially within the context of partition. So that is really highlighted throughout the novel. And what sort of accentuates this more is that uh, Nisha is sort of misfit within the family. So she does not fit very well with everyone else. So she likes to think at times if you were here, you would understand me or you could get me. I would like to read one more section. One, yeah, I'm not getting it. Yeah, okay. I found it.
Okay.
So this is when they are at a temple visit, and I'll just read one section of it. Papa doesn't like to go to temple. We only go on our birthdays and Diwali because Dadi begs us to go. Sometimes Papa walks her there and waits outside for her. I always look forward to going. I drink in the smoky smell of the lamps burning. I even like the metal taste of the holy water on my tongue. The soft sounds of the prayers being chanted and sung make me feel loved, like you are there watching. But maybe a Hindu temple is the last place you will be. So all these sections, repeatedly, she's trying to reconcile, uh, like, you know, that part of her that comes from her mother. Um, and that struggle, that goes on throughout the book because as her awareness increase about, religious differences, right? So even in the book, in the narrative, we find out how slowly that religious difference, people are becoming more aware about that religious differences. People were always aware, but it comes to the conscious, it comes to the forefront of the conscious. People start splitting in religious lines. We see that even happening among kids. And both of them have unpleasant experience in school because of because of this religion difference. So as she grows up and gets to know about these more, and inside she knows that she is part Muslim. So if that comes out, then she will be in danger. So there is a point in the book. So I have not marked the section, so I can just go to it. But there, Nisha mentions to her brother Amel, they don't have any friends. They are in hiding, and they meet a pair of children across their uncle's house. So they want to be friends with them, especially Nisha, because she feels alone, she feels suffocated, and a thought comes to her. So maybe if I tell them that I am half Muslim, they will be friends with me. And and it's her younger brother who realized no, don't do that. That's so naive of you.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
yeah, I don't know. So all these attempts which happen. So so Nisa is in that state, right? In that state where she's neither Hindu or Muslim, and she's trying to figure out among all of these. So I love those sections. I love the fact that they were so raw and so they were unfiltered. So Nisa does not uh, blur any of it. It's just very direct, very asking of a mother, and she never gets a response back. So that's kind of sad for the.
Thank you. We are actually out of time because we were going to end at 9, but if you all don't mind another 5 minutes. Um, I was wondering if you had questions for each other. Maybe we can take one or two of them. And if There are books of historical fiction, maybe one or two, not more than that, because we're really out of time here. But if there are books that you would want to recommend, which have been published in your part of the world, maybe we can go through this very quickly. I'd request everyone to do that. But yeah, does anybody have any questions to begin with for anybody else? Not a problem. Then if we could, sorry. Yes, Kahini, you
Yeah,
were saying something?
I'm not sure about whether it's a question. I had a bit of a thought that I was thinking of when you asked the question about children's voice being neglected. I'm not sure if I answered it well then, but um, when we think about the notion of children and the elderly being the most vulnerable during a moment of emergency or crisis, we kind of realize how unfair it is, unfair the neglect of voice is in non-fictional narratives, but also the vulnerability that we are assigning to children. Doesn't it also bring up questions of I wouldn't want to say authenticity, but like when we were talking about having good faith in the writer and like checking up on historical facts when we are reading fiction, uh, isn't that disjuncture between an adult author portraying a child's voice bring up similar questions like that? I just thought of this, so I don't know if it makes sense. But yeah, like representing a vulnerable voice, isn't there politics to that as well?
Kahini, you've sort of the that is one of the key tensions in children's publishing, right? That you have adults writing for children. It is really one of the central tensions in writing for children, and yet there is a lot of unequal power dynamics within the publishing industry to sort of then have, like, those questions come up with, then so then who writes those perspectives, if a child gets to write it, then within the formal publishing process a lot of questions come up. So that's actually a question that will apply to all of children's publishing, in that sense, that how much of a question of authenticity it is. But we can take this at the end of the recording. Um, um, if everybody can quickly maybe recommend one or two books of historical fiction that you absolutely want uh, the audience to read. Yes. Srijan and Vaibhav, Laura, Kahini, and Siobhan. Yes.
Hi. So I think very essential reading when talking about partition in particular. There's actually two options which I have. I'll go with Khwabnama. Khwabnama by Akhtar Ruzamman Elias. It's one of the best books I've ever read on partition. It starts in 1947 with the Tebaga movement, which was an agricultural revolt, and it goes all the way up to 1971 about the Bangladesh Mukti Juddho or the Liberation War, which I was talking about. One more recommendation that I have when talking about the Bangladesh Liberation War, or even at that same time, the Naxalite movement was very much a thing in Bengal specifically, by one of the most prolific Bengali writers I've ever read, and I really enjoy her reading. Her name is Mahashita Devi, and she's written a book called Hajar Churashin Ma, which can be translated into Mother of 1084. It's the story, or it's a retelling of a mother sort of reliving her son's death, and her son's the reason. I won't spoil the like sort of why it's called Mother of 1084, but I really recommend that everybody read it because the partition and the Naxalite revolution rebellions were, I think, the two of the very important and very formative events in India's current identity, and they are both under a tremendous amount of controversy right now as we speak. So I really recommend these two books for anybody who wants to get into Indian historical fiction.
Sure. Vaibhav, very quickly, books, maybe
Uh,
one book
yeah.
that you want to recommend?
Like if I had to recommend one book, it would be Bhisam Sahani's Tamas. That's a that's a very great book. So the I will just ask the viewers just read for the first chapter, and if it hooks you in, it hooks you in, because it will. So it's a lot more direct. It's a lot more direct with the violence. It's a lot more depressive too. It's a lot more sensitive, and it too also has been under scrutiny for some time now. So yeah, Bisam Sahani's Tamas, and I don't have I remember the names now, but one could also try reading. Mantu has a lot of short stories after Partition, so those are good ones you could read.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Laura? Is there a book that you'd like to recommend?
I do, yeah, I have one. And it's from the US. It's called The Color of a Lie by Kim Johnson. And so we didn't have like a partition maybe, but there are a lot of lines drawn between the races, racial lines. So this is a story of Calvin and his family. They're black, but they have really light skin, so they can pass for white. So they move into a white neighborhood. So the time is the USA, 1950s, when housing segregation was still legal, and when education segregation had ended, but locally it was still practiced. So they would make a white neighborhood, and they would move the district line to make sure that the new school for the white children was on that side, and the other school, the inferior school, was on the other side where the black people live. So there were lines drawn, school district lines. They just changed them. So this is Calvin. He meets a really brave black girl, and he wants to do something with his life that's brave. So it's really good. It's a very good book.
Thank you. That sounds very interesting. Kahini?
Yeah, I had a recommendation that's not about the partition, but it's a more recent publication. It was published in 2015. It's Farthest Field by Raghu Karnad. And the subtitle goes An Indian Story of the Second World War. So it's about three young Indian men who are deployed in the Second World War. And Karnad tries to document the violence that their families see, and he also tries to bring out the forgotten Indian armed forces. It's often overlooked. The stories are often overlooked of Indian men fighting in the Second World War. I thought that was a very interesting perspective. Farthest field.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Finally, Siobhan?
Yeah, I have a bit of a plug actually for Bath Spa, because the book I wanted to recommend is by my professor Philip Hensher, who teaches on our creative writing course. And he really interestingly wrote a book on the Bengal partition, a novel called Scenes from an Early Life, which is written in a memoir style, told from the perspective of his husband, Zaved, who grew up there and was born, I think, right at 1970 or 1971. And so it's sort of a childhood account of what was happening. But it's really interesting, and obviously it touches on what we've been talking about as well, with the sort of idea of partition being more than just about Punjab. But yeah, so I'd recommend reading that.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, I know we have exceeded time pretty wildly, but thank you so much, everyone. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation and to get your views on the book. And yeah, we are going to be having a dialogue with the authors of these books on the 25th of this month. And of course, we look forward to seeing you there, but we would also invite anybody watching to come and join us. Lexi, do you have any final words? And then we can conclude.
No, just to say thank you so much to absolutely everybody who's here today. This will be an amazing resource for lots and lots of people to draw on. So thank you for your generosity in spending the time reading and then contributing to this. I think, as Miko has already said, at this point in history, this work is so important, and what books can do for the development of empathy and understanding for ourselves and for others is just so important. And the more books can travel across borders, the better. And it's so much rarer for children's fiction, and yet that is where empathy needs to start if we are going to have the brighter future we all deserve. So thank you all so very much. And yeah, what a wonderful event. I'm so looking forward to watching this back in full when I'm not lurking in the background doing the text. So thank you. Have a wonderful day, and back to you, Megan, to finish.
Thank you. Yes, I think I said everything that needed to be said, but thank you and bye bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.